The mirror of false perfection is more than just a fleeting feeling of inadequacy, is a deeply ingrained psychological mechanism that hijacks attention, emotion, and behavior. When an individual scrolls through social media, they are presented with a stream of highly curated, selectively filtered experiences that appear flawless. These are snapshots of achievement, joy, and aesthetic perfection, often stripped of the struggle, mistakes, and mundane reality that underlies every human experience. The unconscious mind, unable to differentiate between raw reality and this curated fiction, treats it as an objective standard. Each carefully staged image, each triumphant story, each seamless post is interpreted as evidence that others live lives that are effortlessly better, more meaningful, or more successful. The result is a mental contractional tightening around the belief that one's own life is fundamentally lacking. This self-betrayal occurs because the ego relies on external feedback to validate its self-concept. From early development, individuals learn to compare themselves to peers, siblings, and societal expectations. This comparative framework becomes internalized, and the brain develops a habitual pattern: measure, evaluate, judge when applied to curated online content. This system fails catastrophically. The comparison is never to the raw effort, vulnerability, or unpolished reality of another person, but to a perfected highlight reel. The ego interprets this curated perfection as objective truth, and in doing so, confirms its most painful internal narrative: I am not enough. The psychological impact of this betrayal extends beyond momentary disappointment or envy. It manifests as chronic self-criticism, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of inadequacy. Each interaction with the highlight reel reinforces the neural pathways associated with self-doubt and shame. Over time, the brain becomes conditioned to seek external validation constantly, scanning feeds for proof of personal insufficiency. This cycle perpetuates itself, creating a self-reinforcing loop where the individual is both addicted to and harmed by social comparison. The brain misinterprets each perfectly curated success story as a threat, triggering stress responses, activating the amygdala, and releasing cortisol, reinforcing the fight-or-flight response, even in situations that are psychologically, not physically, dangerous. A critical component of the self-betrayal lies in the misattribution of cause. The mind assumes that the effortless success and happiness portrayed online is solely the result of personal attributes such as talent, charm, or inherent luck. It ignores the unseen labor, risk, failures, and compromises behind every post. For instance, an image of a flawlessly decorated home or a glamorous vacation might obscure the years of debt repayment, logistical planning, and compromise required to achieve that result. The observer's brain collapses these layers, constructing a misleading equation: highlight reel equals effortless superiority. This oversimplification deepens the sense of inferiority because the mind falsely concludes that what they lack is an innate flaw rather than a difference in circumstance, opportunity, or effort. Another dimension of this betrayal is temporal distortion. Social media presents the most polished moments of countless lives simultaneously, as if perfection is the constant state of human experience. In reality, human lives are episodic, marked by success and failure, joy and struggle. The curated presentation erases this temporal context, producing a psychological illusion in which everyone else's high points appear perpetual. For the individual, the contrast between their constant lived reality, messy, incomplete, often stressful, and the perceived perfection of others' lives creates profound dissonance. The mind, seeking resolution, defaults to self-blame. The flaw is internal, not external. This explains why even accomplished individuals can feel fundamentally inadequate. When scrolling through curated content, they are misaligning episodic reality with perpetual perfection. Self-betrayal is further amplified by the personalization bias inherent in human cognition. The brain interprets external signals as directly relevant to the self. In the context of social comparison, this means that every image of success or beauty is processed not merely as information, but as a personalized judgment. This is what I should be. The cognitive distortion transforms external content into an internal verdict. The observer unconsciously integrates these comparisons into self-assessment, increasing feelings of shame, envy, and futility. The result is a cognitive feedback loop where perception of inadequacy drives more consumption of content, seeking reassurance or understanding only to encounter further triggers of self-criticism. The behavioral consequences of this pattern are equally significant. Many individuals respond to the self-betrayal of comparison with one or more maladaptive coping strategies. Some withdraw socially, reducing real-life interaction out of fear of further inadequacy. Others engage in performative behaviors, overposting, overachieving, or curating their own digital persona. These strategies, rather than alleviating distress, reinforce the cycle. Validation becomes externalized. Self-worth is tethered to visibility, and authenticity is sacrificed for perceived approval. Each iteration deepens the entanglement with curated realities, making the liberation from comparison increasingly difficult. To understand the self-betrayal fully, it is essential to examine its evolutionary roots. Humans are inherently social creatures, attuned to status and hierarchy for survival and reproductive advantage. The cognitive machinery that evolved to detect social signals, infer intentions, and compare relative status is now operating in a virtual environment saturated with artificially amplified cues. The mismatch between evolved social cognition and the curated realities of the digital age produces a psychological stressor for which our brains are poorly equipped. In other words, the mechanisms that once promoted survival attentiveness to peer successor now weaponized against the psyche by an environment that exaggerates and distorts signals. Finally, the resolution of self-betrayal requires a multifaceted approach. The first step is conscious awareness, recognizing that the comparison is inherently flawed and curated. The observer must explicitly label the mental process as a cognitive distortion. Next, attention must be redirected toward internal metrics of value, effort, growth, authenticity, and personal satisfaction rather than external validation. Practices such as journaling, mindfulness, and self-reflection can help anchor the mind in lived reality rather than curated fiction. Additionally, intentional reduction of exposure to high comparison environments, digital fasting, limiting social media, or selective engagement can decrease the frequency and intensity of triggering inputs, allowing the psyche to recalibrate. Ultimately, understanding the self-betrayal of comparison is an exercise in reclaiming agency. The individual learns to observe curated realities without internalizing them as measures of worth. They recognize that highlight reels are a form of storytelling, not absolute truth, and that perceived inadequacies are reflections of cognitive distortion rather than objective failure. This insight transforms the psychological landscape, replacing shame with understanding and anxiety with clarity. Through consistent practice, the individual rebuilds a sense of self, not defined by external comparison, but by lived experience, intrinsic values, and conscious engagement with reality. By analyzing the mirror of false perfection, one can begin to dismantle the internalized machinery of self-betrayal. The recognition that the mind is complicit in its own distortion interpreting curated signals as truth is the foundation for reclaiming clarity, agency, and authenticity. Only then can the observer separate fact from illusion, internalize their own achievements, and engage with the world without the oppressive lens of comparison. If this analysis resonates, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel explores the hidden psychological dynamics that govern thought, perception, and self-concept, revealing the mechanisms of comparison, social influence, and internalized shame, while offering strategies to reclaim mental clarity and authentic agency.